Welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast. My name is Anthony Oliver, and today we are exploring the way the UK Armed Services has been radically upping its game in terms of the support, promotion and development of professional engineering careers. To do this, I'm joined today by Squadron Leader David Littlemore from the Royal Air Force, currently Executive Officer Infrastructure at Cyber and Specialist Operations Command. David is also a Fellow of the Institution of Civil Engineers, in fact the only chartered civil engineer in the RAF. And I'd say that he is also a passionate advocate for merging the best of military and civilian engineering training to create complete and capable professional engineers fit for the future. Now, David's engineering career journey was unorthodox. He started straight from school, age 16, working in a bridge design office where he progressed through ONC and HNC studies before gaining a degree in civil engineering at Durham University. He then switched to the military by being commissioned into the Royal Air Force in 2008. Since then, his career has bridged the gap between civilian consultancy and high-stakes military infrastructure, tackling work across the UK and also from the South Atlantic to the Middle East. Today, as a chartered civil engineer, he's certainly testament to the long, winding road of modern professional engineering careers. Beyond his technical expertise in project management and infrastructure delivery, he mentors young technicians and engineers and is committed to helping the next generation understand the profound value of professional recognition and what it takes to build a career. So let's hear more. David, welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. Well, let's start, David, with where you are today as squadron leader in the RAF. Now, people often associate the RAF primarily with pilots. So how does the role of a professional civil engineer integrate into the broader mission of the Royal Air Force?
So pilots are the tip of the spear in terms of our operational outputs in the Royal Air Force. But in order to get those aircraft and capabilities into the skies, we need infrastructure, and that underpins everything we do. So whether that's runways to make sure our aircraft can take off and land, explosive storage areas, domestic and technical accommodation for people to work and live in, security or fuels infrastructure, they underpin everything that the Royal Air Force does in terms of its capability outputs.
Yeah. So, I mean, in many ways, very similar bits of kit to you might find in the civilian area. But how fundamentally, therefore, does the being a professional engineer in the military differ from working in the civilian sector? I mean, it's all concrete and steel, isn't it?
Yeah. Many of those capabilities have specialist requirements that perhaps you wouldn't have if you're on a domestic airport. So that needs specialist infrastructure and engineering knowledge to be able to design, implement and maintain those facilities to ensure that our capabilities are ready to go 24/7 in some cases.
As I said, you're the only chartered civil engineer in the Royal Air Force. Do you see yourself as leading the charge then, David, towards professionalising infrastructure engineering at the RAF?
It's something that's really important to me, and I'd really like to see people recruited into the Air Force, whether that's either through lateral entry or through direct entrance coming right at the very bottom of the scheme with civil engineering degrees, so that they can go on, get the right experience either in the Royal Air Force or perhaps doing some work with the Royal Engineers or industry, to then go on to become incorporated or chartered engineers with the Institution of Civil Engineers.
Yeah. You're now a fellow of the ICE. In fact, you've just joined the ICE's council. And I know that there's a long-standing link between the ICE, for instance, and the Army's Royal Engineers. So what's the relationship between professional civilian engineers and professional military engineers more widely?
So I think there is obviously an overlap in a lot of the work that we do in the United Kingdom and overseas on some of our bases. So we will interact. Royal Engineers will help the Royal Air Force with its infrastructure overseas and on deployed operations. But also in the UK, we'll reach back to civilian industry and technical service providers to provide the designs and oversee the construction of some of our facilities in the UK. So there's a lot of interaction there. I've certainly worked an awful lot with the Royal Engineers during my time in the Royal Air Force, both in the UK and overseas. And there's a great relationship there in terms of knowledge sharing and education that I've benefited from through the Royal School of Military Engineering at Chatham and a host of other opportunities, especially through the institution as well.
So there's a very healthy relationship between civilian and military engineering that continues.
I believe so, yes, that's correct.
I mentioned at the top about the Armed Services professionalising engineering. The 2009 Haddon Cave report into the loss of a Nimrod aircraft in Afghanistan in 2006 is often quoted as being a turning point for the armed forces in terms of professionalising its engineering capability. Can you explain how you see this report as changing the landscape for registered professionals within the MOD?
So the Hand Cave report had 84 recommendations, and one of those was strengthening engineering expertise within the Ministry of Defence, especially on the aviation safety side of the house. For many years, engineering expertise had been disinvested out to civilian contractors, and it was recommended that getting that back in-house with suitably qualified and professionally qualified engineers would help eliminate some of the problems that caused that terrible disaster.
Yeah.
So what do we mean by that? That's getting people chartered, having people come through with the right education and professional qualifications to take on the roles that's required of them in terms of aviation safety. It also led to the stand-up of the Military Aviation Authority with regard to improving overall oversight and implementation of military aviation.
Yeah. And does that legacy still drive the culture at the RAF in terms of engineering? I mean, I described the armed forces upping their game in terms of professional engineering. I mean, is that how you see it?
Indeed so. So at Staff College, the Hand Cave report is covered in great detail. So everybody, whether you're an administrator or you're an engineer or a pilot, understands what that was, what that meant, what the failings were, and make sure that doesn't happen again within defence. On the infrastructure or hard infrastructure, as I'm involved with as a civil engineer, that also transfers across into the infrastructure profession. We're certainly looking in the Royal Air Force to further professionalise our infrastructure branch and make sure people have the right qualifications and experience and continuing professional development to make sure they retain the knowledge and skills to be competent in their roles.
I suppose the equivalent of that in the civilian area might be becoming an informed client, becoming an intelligent client, having the skills to know what it is that you need to do as a client.
Yeah, and that's really important, especially when you get onto more complex engineering projects on our Royal Air Force stations. Understanding the second and third order effects of what you're planning to construct or do and what that means is really important. So you can understanding the requirement, understanding how you deliver that requirement and what's involved with that is really important.
Interesting stuff. Well, let's explore your own journey to professional engineering. You started your career as a technician at 16 working for Atkins. So what drew you, David, into engineering at such a young age?
Indeed. So from a very early age, I can remember going out and watching roadworks with my father and my grandfather, and playing with lots of construction-related toys when I was younger, and that kind of fueled my interest in engineering. And coupled with that, I spent a lot of time at air shows as a young boy. So the two kind of coupled together and kind of came together a bit later on. And I had a really good place at a sixth form college in Cambridge, but saw an advert in the paper for a trainee junior bridge technician at WS Atkins in Cambridge, which kind of drew my attention, kind of pulled me towards that. I applied, interviewed, I got offered a job, and started before my GCSE results.
Yeah. Well, exactly. You decided not to study for A-levels, despite having good predictions. I mean, that sounds like quite a big decision for a 16-year-old.
It was a huge decision. All my friends thought I was absolutely barking mad. Like, Dave, why are you not going onto A-levels? But it's been the most remarkable journey from that point. And would I do it any other way? Definitely not.
All right. Well, how did that early hands-on experience with Atkins, and I suppose also the £5,500 salary I think you said you started on, working in highway structures shape your perspective and I suppose prompt you to move from ONC to H&C through to degree level at Durham University? What drove that progression?
Okay, so we're working in a bridge design office, spent a lot of time out inspecting bridges under the routine bridge inspection programs, a lot of time measuring up bridges and drawing bridges. So that kind of made me understand the problems with older bridges and how we were going to repair those, and also got involved with design of remedial schemes for those. So kind of understanding what was wrong with them and then going on to design them. And it was just a fantastic place to work. Yeah.
Well, you were an ICE Quest scholar at Durham. Tell us about that. How did that come about? What is the ICE Quest scheme?
So the Queen's Jubilee Scholarship Trust is what Quest is, and that supports undergraduates and there's also a host of other Quest scholars for travel as well with undergraduate study. When I applied back in the year 2000, I think it was a very limited number of places, not as many as there are now. But that gave me, I think, £1,200 a year towards my university education, which was very well greatly appreciated. It paid for some books and my college fees up in Durham, and And it also put me in touch with the local IC network up in Durham as well. So we had a mentor that was in Durham. And again, that opened connections. There were other IC scholars studying at Durham as well. Yeah. So it kind of got me into that kind of first steps into the inner side of the Institution of Civil Engineers.
Well, Atkins took you to the Bahamas, amongst other places, in 1998, which sounds incredibly exciting. You then joined Hannah Reid Associates, which became Peter Brett Associates, as a civil engineer working under an Institution of Civil Engineers approved training scheme. What prompted that move to join a new consultancy and get into water and engineering management?
So having worked in bridges in the early start of my career, Hannah Reid, a smaller consultancy, a much broader breadth of projects and experience. And I was just kind of drawn towards that. I didn't want to be the person that just worked on one single thing for the whole entire career. I wanted to get out and see some other projects and develop that broad engineering spectrum, which has then set me up really well for my career in the Royal Air Force.
Yeah, well that came next, of course, because that was a massive step to join the RAF on a 30-week initial officer training course. How come? You said you're interested in flying, but I think you now got your private pilot's license. So clearly, you've always been interested in flying. Was flying always the motivation?
I would have loved to have been a pilot. I think I'm too tall and I haven't got the stomach for it, unfortunately, which is why I went into engineering. But why did I decide to make that change? It's something I'd always wanted to do. I wanted to have an established educational and a professional training agreement signed off before I then made that jump. So I always had that to fall back onto if the Air Force didn't work out. But the Air Force did work out. We're obviously commissioned into the Royal Air Force at Cranwell, and Her Majesty the Queen was up to my graduation ceremony, which was probably the last time that she went to Cranwell, which is a great thing to look back on and remember with great fondness.
I said that your career was kind of interesting and not necessarily orthodox, because you're now a chartered engineer, but you started off by becoming an incorporated engineer in 2010. Why did you take that middle step?
So my degree from Durham was a bachelor's degree, so that didn't mean I had the educational requirements to immediately go on to become a chartered engineer with the institution. So incorporated engineer was the natural first step. Having completed the training agreement, been worked on a range of projects during my time at Hannah Reid to get that experience and signed off. iEng was the logical progression and first stop on that professional membership ladder.
Well, I think your route was, you describe it as the technical report route to becoming chartered. What is that? Just for those who may be not familiar with that particular different routes to get there, how do you describe that route and what are the rigours of that pathway?
So there's an educational difference between a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. Obviously, I wasn't going to go back to university, unfortunately, and study for a master's. That just wasn't possible at the time. And the technical report route looks to see that you have achieved that difference in educational requirements through experience in your role or further learning away from university to show that you've met that standard.
Right. Rather than having to go back and get a master's for an additional year. I've read something where you said, when I first started working as a technician, I always looked up to the chartered engineers that I worked for and always one day hoped that I would be a chartered engineer myself. So, David, what did it feel like then to finally receive that letter from the Engineering Council confirming you'd reached the pinnacle of CEng?
Yeah, it was a massive moment for me. As you said, that comment that I made several years ago, the journey from there, from W.S. Atkins, straight out of school through the educational, the training agreement, and then the experience in workplace has been vast. I've been a member of the institution now for nearly 30 years. I think we're 30 years next year. Yeah. So it really was the pinnacle. And you say I looked up to the chartered engineers that I worked for, just their knowledge and experience and how to turn a problem from a blank sheet of paper into an implemented solution out on site, and just building up that knowledge. That's where I wanted to be. And work overseas on amazing projects like mentioned in the Bahamas. Yeah.
Well, I do remember that moment myself when that letter came through the post, and I then celebrated it and then quickly became a journalist. But that's another story for another day. Anyway, turning to your career at the RAF, I say you're currently executive officer based at Northwood HQ. What does your current role then entail?
So I'm the Executive Officer Infrastructure for Cyber and Specialist Operations Command. You might kind of think of that role as like a Chief of Staff. So I work very closely with the Head of Infrastructure and the Deputy Head of Infrastructure in corralling infrastructure activity across all of our sites in the UK and overseas.
Yeah. I mean, being a squadron leader doesn't necessarily mean you have to be up there flying then.
No, unfortunately not. So I've been very fortunate during my time in the Air Force to get on some of our larger transport aircraft and fly around to various locations, which has been great fun. But unfortunately, don't get to fly in my day job.
Well, that is a common question for RAF officers. Do you get the chance to use your flying skills? Is your cockpit just simply the construction site? But presumably your flying knowledge, your passion for aviation does help you in your career.
Indeed. So from having my own private pilot's license, understanding what you need on an airfield and what's important, and when things don't work or something's not right, really helps you when you're designing airfields and maintaining airfields to make sure that things that work and correct and what they actually mean to the aircrew that are using those facilities.
So what's your aeroplane of choice at the moment then?
A personal aircraft, so Cessna 172s for my private pilot's license, which is, you should probably say the Volkswagen Golf of the general aviation world.
You get up there as much as you possibly can, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's really important to understand the capabilities that we support with infrastructure, and the Air Force is very good at making sure that everyone that works in the whole system understands what's going on.
Yeah, you worked in a huge variety of roles in the RAF and included a couple of stints in the Falklands, in the Middle East. What are the unique logistics challenges of delivering infrastructure in such remote, quite often hostile environments?
So if we take the Falklands, for example, obviously a long way from the United Kingdom. There's no B&Q, there's no screw fix if you forget something. So the logistical planning that goes on, especially major projects, is huge in terms of getting materials, workforce, and the right equipment in the right place at the right time, which can obviously add an awful lot of cost onto projects as well. Yeah. So if you need to hire a crane for a day, you probably need to hire a crane for 3 months by the time it's come on the ship and gone back home again.
Wow, God. Well, you say that one of your career highlights was designing, I suppose, a much simpler scheme, which was a repatriation centre for fallen service personnel while working at Brize Norton. I mean, it's clearly an important and prestigious project. Did that also have kind of an emotional, professional weight, delivering a project of that significance? It means a lot to the people who use it.
Indeed. So when Royal Air Force Lineman closed and all the activities moved across to Brize Norton, we decided to build a repatriation centre at Brize Norton, and getting that right for the families of the servicemen and women that had fallen in Afghanistan or Iraq was really important. And it was one of those projects where it was going to be used the first week that we opened it. So it was handed over, and unfortunately it was used the week after, and it had to be right for the families. And so massive burden of responsibility to make sure that was correct for everyone involved.
Important stuff, and I suppose it does underline the realities of being in the armed services. You've also been involved in runway rehabilitation projects and housing and accommodation refurbishment. I mean, clearly the MOD has got a vast estate. What have you learnt about planned and effective asset management? Because that's something which the UK in general struggles with.
The defence estate's huge. I think 1 or 2% of the UK landmass belongs to defence. We've got 37, 38 air stations, major naval ports, and a host of barracks across the United Kingdom and overseas. So it's a difficult job trying to keep everything going, especially on the Royal Air Force estate. A lot of it was built 1938, pre-World War II. Pre-war expansion period. So a lot of that infrastructure now is coming to the end of its life and needs replacement. So a lot of thought needs to go into asset management and ensuring our investment goes into the right places at the right time to make sure our operational capabilities are maintained.
But I'm sure that whole military engineering side of your career is now second nature. But I suppose going back to when you first did your 30-week initial officer training, I mean, what was the hardest transition when you moved from being a civilian engineer to becoming a military officer?
I think the early responsibility when you're a junior officer in the Air Force is what kind of hits you. All of a sudden, you walk out of Cranwell, and where you may have been working under a whole hierarchy in industry. All of a sudden, you're at the top of that hierarchy in your specific role, and people look to you for the answers. Mm-hmm. So, what are we going to do? So that early responsibility was quite not a shock, but actually, I'm in charge. Yeah, I'm in charge, and that's quite a responsibility.
But I remember when travelling with New Civil Engineer to Bosnia, we went with the Royal Engineers, and you were hosted by the very junior officer, and I just remember thinking how unbelievably competent these young guys were 2021?
Yeah, I think what officer training teaches you, a lot of leadership skills and tools that perhaps you wouldn't get such in-depth training in civilian streets, but also working under pressure when you're tired, when you're cold, in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. That really puts you to the test and gives you a lot of really good skills for the future, makes you very resilient.
Well, not so long ago, of course, you were an instructor at the Royal Air Force Division of the Defence Academy. Lots of emphasis there on leadership training, I imagine. How did that help you reflect personally, I suppose, on your own leadership style? What kind of leader are you, David?
Working at Defence Academy was a fantastic opportunity, and the ability to interact with a syndicate of 10 or 12 junior officers every month and get them to reflect on their leadership since they went through Cranwell was really eye-opening. A very different generation than I am, so to speak, in terms of their outlook. But very, very interesting what they would come back and tell you what they were looking for in their leaders.
Oh, right.
And I certainly took a lot away from that in terms of how I'm going to develop my leadership style going forward.
You now live near Oxford. What do you get up to outside of work apart from trying to get your airplanes in the air?
Okay, so I like to try and get flying when I can. I also have a beautiful Cotswold cottage, which I like to keep on top of and maintain. So that's what I do. And I've got a keen interest in architecture as well, especially the Cotswold vernacular in terms of...
And do you have a family?
I do. I have a wife and a daughter and a son, and they keep me busy as well.
Right. How old are your kids?
My son is 1.5 and my daughter is 4.5.
Oh, right. And are they likely? Are they going to be edged towards that kind of playing with construction toys, looking at airplanes the way you were?
Yeah, so my son has already shown an interest in aviation and tractors. Right. So he likes to take things to bits and put things back together, even at 1.5. So I think he's obviously got that genetically from his father. And
your daughter, I hope, is doing the same.
Yes, but not to the same extent. I think my son's certainly got the bug that I have.
Okay. So I suppose looking back at your move to the RAF, I mean, have there been any scary moments where your engineering judgment was put to the ultimate test under operational pressure?
I think an example I can probably bring out there is we're doing some runway rehabilitation works on one of our airfields overnight. Obviously, the flights that were inbound from across the world had obviously taken off from their locations and we're heading back to the airfield. The works were finished. I was asked to inspect the works and they weren't finished to the required standard, and obviously I had asked for that remedial works to be undertaken. Obviously, there's the pressure of the aircraft's on the way and people want to get the airfield back operational again, but I was not prepared to accept substandard works on the airfield, and it's very important in terms of aviation safety.
So how does the RAF support its engineers to help them to have the confidence, I suppose, to make those important decisions?
So officer training kind of teaches you those kind of things in terms of making the right decisions at the right time, good moral compass, just culture as well. So we have a very good culture in the Royal Air Force that, if you make a mistake, especially in the aircraft engineering world, if you make a mistake, own up to it and we can sort it out rather than brush it under the carpet and it causes problems later on. So that just culture is really important. We have a really good continual professional development through like the courses at Defence Academy that I was involved with when I was an instructor, and they continue throughout your whole career as you work through the ranks.
Right, yeah. So CPD is clearly very important in the RAF.
So we're very fortunate that we have access to a whole range of courses, whether they be online through our defence learning environment, external courses. I've done some really interesting courses on aerodrome design during my time, or just wider, softer skills that will help you as a leader.
All of which I imagine is very motivating for young apprentices or young graduates.
Indeed. So, a range of qualifications, whether that's, Association for Project Management qualifications, managing successful programs, and management of risk, really important as well. We really do get a really good blend of learning and education from the military.
And I suppose in your experience, how does the RAF's qualification structure this kind of constant CPD to make sure that you are moving forward in your careers? How does it help motivate an apprentice or a young graduate?
So the Royal Air Force offers many opportunities. So if you're a direct entrant, aircraft technician joining the Royal Air Force, you will put through some of the best training in the world at Royal Air Force Cosford in terms of aeronautical engineering training. The same with our officers in that respect.
Right, yeah. At the ICE today, David, you now become a professional reviewer. You're assessing people's competence and suitability to be awarded professional engineering qualifications. I imagine that's a tough, but also a really important role. Why did you get attracted to that?
So I've been a professional reviewer now for 10 years. I've tried to concentrate on the incorporated engineer professional reviews, having been through that route myself. Previously, I find it really quite rewarding to see similar people to me making that journey through the institution. It takes a lot of work. We don't just turn up and do the review. There's a lot of pre-reading of people's submissions, thinking of suitable questions to draw out the experience from the interview. And there's a lot of work in terms of writing up the professional reviews afterwards. It's not always easy. Not everyone passes, unfortunately. And I take it very seriously in terms of giving correct feedback and guidance as to why people haven't made the required standards. And so they can go away, hopefully, work on those areas and go on and to become professional engineers in due course.
And I suppose those are, the majority of those candidates are from the civilian side. Do you particularly look out for those coming through from military backgrounds?
No, so the allocations are made randomly by the institution. So I don't think I've ever reviewed a military candidate yet. But maybe, I'm sure we'll do in the future.
Yeah. Why do you think the military, as I say, going back to what I said at the start about them upping their game in terms of professionalising engineering, why do you think the military values professional institution registration so highly compared to its existing internal rank and seniority that it's got there?
I think membership of the professional institutions, it's an external validation of your skills and competence independently assessed by peers within the institution. Mm-hmm. So it's totally independent. It makes sure that people are competent and externally assessed, which gives that independence, which is really important rather than internal.
I suppose it also should help people do their jobs better.
Indeed, yeah.
Well, look, let's get some advice to finish with, perhaps around the value of professional recognition and what you might suggest to young people coming through. I mean, you say for you that your professional registration opened doors to projects you wouldn't otherwise have considered. Give us an example of the sort of the doors that it's opened then.
Yeah, so I've been selected for a number of roles on projects which, if I hadn't been a chartered engineer, I don't think I would have been. One specific example was the design of a new headquarters facility in the Middle East, whereas I was involved with the requirements and design of that, working alongside the US Army Corps of Engineers. Got to go to Washington and Winchester in America to do tender evaluations. And I don't think I would have been selected for that if I hadn't got those professional qualifications. We just would not have had the credibility to put someone forward that didn't have that. I was working alongside my Royal Engineers colleagues on that particular project.
So looking back, I suppose, in today's world, would you advise yourself to do A-levels?
No, actually, I don't think I would. I think the practical application that you learn in an ONC and a HNC in civil engineering, probably some of the most useful skills that I use every day. That taught me how to execute problems there and then. University taught me how to solve the more complex problems, going beyond the design codes as they sit now. So no, I wouldn't say don't do A-levels. I think the ONC route, working and learning at the same time, is a great way to do it.
A young person asked me recently, would I advise them to go to university or to go down an apprenticeship route? Where are you on that? Apprenticeships versus university?
So university comes with huge costs these days, which isn't always open to everybody. So the apprenticeship routes to be able to do a degree while you're working in industry may be a more palatable option for some people. So some people going into civil engineering later on in their lives, perhaps with children or families, the apprenticeship might be the better way to do it.
Apprenticeships, are they possible with the military?
For our serving airmen, they can do an in-service degree in engineering management. But that's again on the aircraft maintenance, on the aircraft engineering side of things.
So not necessarily in infrastructure.
No.
Not yet. Maybe that's coming for the future. So for a young technician currently studying for ONC/HNC, what's the most important piece of advice you can give them about navigating their career ahead?
So I think I've probably got a couple of pieces of advice, really. The first is to make the most of every opportunity that's given to you in terms of going out on site, seeing things, getting experience, going to meetings, seeing how your seniors work and interact at meetings, how you design things, how they solve problems. So that's really important, and only you can do that. Ask, can I come on this? Can I go on that?
Yeah. That goes out networking thing you said when you originally got your Quest. It gave you access to the network.
Yeah, so the network's really important. Make those contacts. They might not be inside your own organisation, and maybe in other organisations. Go on site visits on other things. I think there's one thing I would say is create opportunities for people as well. So I try where I can to get people to come and see some of my projects, or if people reach out to me on LinkedIn, I try and give them the best advice that I can in terms of progressing their careers forward. Okay. I think as well, there are lots of, going back to with the Quest scholarships, there are lots of scholarships out there to fund your studies, whether that's for a master's or your initial undergraduate degree. Make the most of those opportunities that they exist. You've just got to go out and look for those opportunities, apply, and have the drive and passion to progress. Right. I think that's another thing. Having the drive and passion for your industry in civil engineering will take you wherever you want to go, and the world's your limit in civil engineering. Well,
certainly it's happened in your career. I mean, I suppose looking forward though to the future. From where you are now today, what's the next big challenge that you were hoping to tackle, either in the RAF or within the Institution of Civil Engineers?
So in the Royal Air Force, I'd really like to see that kind of further professionalisation of our infrastructure branch. I'm the only chartered civil engineer in the Royal Air Force, which is a great shame, because back in the pre-1960s, we had the airfield construction branch of the Royal Air Force, and there was a huge band of civil engineers that were working building airfields all across the world after the Second World War, but we sadly gave that up to the Royal Engineers in 1966. So I'd like to see that progress. So I think with the institution, one thing I'd really like to do, and building on my experience working at the Defence Academy, is to try and bring junior engineers, perhaps on the cusp of professional registration or just after, together into some kind of educational training course that kind of develops their leadership skills as civil engineers, helps them network across not just their own organisation, but the wider infrastructure organisation in the United Kingdom and overseas, and also help them understand that kind of like next level. How does infrastructure spending in the United Kingdom get decided? How do we influence government as the institution, and build those skills so when they go into those senior leadership positions later on in their careers, they're kind of equipped and have the knowledge to be able to do that, rather than having to deal with that when they get there a bit later on in their careers.
That sounds like a conversation you need to have with David Porter, the president.
Indeed, I'll take that up with him next time I see him.
Bob, on that note, would you ever see yourself putting yourself forward to be president of the Institution of Civil Engineers?
Well, that would be the absolute pinnacle of my career. Having been a member since the age of 16, that really would. I would not say no. I think if I'm lucky enough to get the right experience throughout the rest of my career, and maybe a bit later on, I would love to get involved with that later on.
That would be another first, I suppose. The first civil engineer president from the RAF. Look, David, really, really interesting career you had there. Really interesting set of challenges you've got right now. But great to chat to you. I think it's really inspiring to hear about these unusual career journeys. So certainly one that bucks the usual trends, that's for sure. Thanks so much for sharing it today, and thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Oh, thanks, Anthony.
Sadly, that's all we've got time for on the podcast now, but there's more in the pipeline as we continue to probe the big issues facing the sector. If you haven't done so already, do check out the Infrastructure Podcast website, www.infrastructure-podcast.com, where you'll find background information and all the latest podcasts to listen to and to share. Thanks again for joining us. Thanks again to David, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.